Welcome back to Heja Framtiden, the Swedish podcast on the future. My name is Christian von Essen. I'm recording here from Nordic Food Waste Summit 2023 here in Stockholm at Garnisonen. Now I'm sitting here with Matt Homewood. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
You were up on stage earlier today. You run an Instagram account called An Urban Harvester. Let's begin there. Why did you start harvesting food from urban environments?
Yeah, so I was living in an urban environment as a student, and I came across this concept called dumpster diving, and I was seeing shocking amounts of food, and it got to a stage where, I was saving money, but then I was seeing the climate change and the biodiversity crisis. So then I thought, okay, well, let's start taking photos of this stuff, because if the price had been set right, I knew that a lot of people would be interested in buying this great food, because it wasn't just a few rotten apples, as you can see on my Instagram photos, and that was it, and it grew from there. A lot of people were sad or outraged and shocked, and what I realized is that there were other dumpster divers right across the West doing the same as me, so I shared their photos more and more, and just trying to get the message out there that yes, consumers waste a lot of food at home, but also businesses who are making a lot of profit every year are wasting a lot of food, because basically they're hoarding. They're not setting the right price according to their oversupply. So if the price had been a bit lower, many people would have bought that item. And today we see in Sweden, groceries inflation for the last year has been 20%, yet we know a lot of supermarket dumpsters are still full. Why do we accept that?
Yeah, and we've been talking about lots of different things here today. Primary production, food loss, and household food waste, and what you can do as an individual. But you are really going after the retailers here and the whole power structure. What do you find shocking with the data that you found so far?
Yeah, well, I started going into economics because economics runs the world. I've got a biology background, believe it or not. But what I realized that basically our food system represents an hourglass. At the top, in Sweden, for example, you've got tens of thousands of farmers, probably. You've probably got thousands of food manufacturers. At the bottom, there's about 10.5 million Swedish consumers. But in the middle, you've got three companies, ICA-gruppen, Co-op, Axfood, who own all these different labels, but it's three companies ultimately, and they control 90% of sales. What that means is that actually, in the end, very much power lies in very few hands. And that means that as a consumer, there's only so many companies you can turn to, basically, when there's so little competition. And for capitalism to work, you need healthy competition between companies to make progress on food waste, to drive down prices via discounting if you're oversupplied. So that's why I started to focus on supermarkets, because actually, as a tech supplier, I work for Throw No More these days, a Norwegian app. I see it firsthand in business meetings. They have so much power. They can push down on price when actually it's very hard to run a business. They can just make ludicrous demands. So then I was thinking, wow, I can't even believe what it must be like to have a farm to sell to these people. So I think we need to talk about power in the food system.
And what can you say about Throw No More? You said it's an app. You sort of advertise products that are reaching the date limit. Is that correct?
Exactly. So we see that, at the moment, supermarkets are struggling to forecast demand accurately. And so to help them shift that oversupply, basically, as an employee discounts the item, we're connected from an IT perspective, which means that the minute that item is discounted, it arrives on the Throw No More app. So then the Throw No More app user, which is a free app, you can see what's available where on your way home from work and pick your shopping destination based on that information. So you save money on those items, you save time because you know where they are in the city, and then from the retail perspective, well, because the customer has to go into the store to find the item and buy it, what we see is that consumers, because they're short on time, they buy toothpaste or toilet paper, and that's where the supermarket is recovering some of that loss via the discounts. So it's kind of a reciprocity relationship. Retailers are being generous by discounting to reduce their food waste, and then the customers are rewarding them with those good practices by buying full price goods. So it just makes sense. It's a win-win.
And that's one of many tools in the toolbox, of course, one of many solutions that we talked about here today. But what do you think is needed for the retailers to really step up? Do we need legislation and regulation, or do we need more data and better solutions for monitoring the supply, or both?
I think it's a mixture, it's a combination. Like, we see so many great tech companies. Like, for example, there's a Swedish tech company called Y-Waste. They operate in 18 countries, but I chat to them, and for them, sometimes it takes them years to land a contract with a supermarket. So what we're seeing is that the uptake of great technology, which ultimately is very cheap compared to the total revenue for a supermarket, is taking way too long. And we don't have the time with the climate change, the biodiversity crisis, or the human hunger that also happens. Sometimes we forget that. We just focus too much on the environment. So I think at the moment, many people talked about it today at the conference, wasting food, great food, is too cheap. So we need to bump up the price on that, so that suddenly retailers can invest in better forecasting, solutions like Y-Waste or Throw No More or Too Good To Go, to get that food to people and not the dumpster.
Can you just briefly make the case for why food waste is such a bad idea and why we should focus on it more higher on the agenda?
Yeah, I mean, so food waste, if food waste was a country, this is kind of a classic, but some people don't know it, so it's worth repeating. If food waste was a country, it would be number 3, behind China and America in terms of carbon emissions yearly. It's 10%, believe it or not, and that's from the farm to the supermarket to the household. So it's a complex problem, no doubt, but it's a massive problem and it needs work from many fronts. The other angle is that the food system has a disproportionate impact on our planet, which is why many people will say that you should go vegan. You know, some people go for that, some people don't. But food waste is 40% from farm to fork. So if you could halve food waste, for example, you could free up a huge amount of land so that animals and plants could also live by our side. Because yes, the climate's a problem, but we're also losing wildlife 100 to 1,000 times more quickly via extinction than what is normal. Because extinction is a natural process. But that's not good. 100 times or 1,000 times higher than the background rate. So, and then you've got the hunger. This is pre-corona, so it'll be much worse now, especially with inflation. But pre-corona, you had 690 million people who suffered from hunger. So this isn't just moderate food insecurity, as they call it. This is severe. You got 3 billion people apparently who can't afford a healthy diet, so fresh fruit and veg and meat, for example. And so when you know how much for food waste is happening on the farms, at the manufacturers, at the supermarket, it's like, no, this is not okay. Like, yes, Sweden's a small country, but you're a rich country, you buy a lot on the global food markets, and so 40% food waste has inevitable consequences on the global food prices. And yes, we're rich in the north, but not most countries are in such a privileged position.
Do you see that a summit like this, high-level ministers, there are 2 princesses here today, do you see that we're entering a new era where this topic is actually being put higher on the agenda?
Yes, I think that the war in Ukraine has obviously had massive consequences on food prices. In Sweden, as I said, you've got groceries inflation running at 20%. Denmark, it's been 16%. Suddenly, it's not only, the poorest 10% of people who are struggling. Now you've got huge swathes of the middle class who are really struggling. That's just food. Then you've got mortgages, etc. So suddenly, you've got masses of voters who are struggling. And then suddenly, if you can start getting commercial food waste high on the agenda, ministers might be able to, get some political backing via their citizens by getting good legislation out there. Who doesn't want to reduce food waste? Who doesn't want to reduce supermarket food waste? Well, ultimately, what's hard to understand for people is that they think that supermarket food waste is a bad thing for retailers, which it is in part. But for example, Axfood last year, I looked at their financial results. In 2022, they made 2.4 billion Swedish krona in net profit. And yet they're still wasting a lot of food. And then the food they're not wasting, they're shifting to volunteers in food banks who aren't paid. So there's a conflict of interest there, and it's a complicated topic. But my point is, yes, I think we're entering a new era because inflation is going to be here to stay, and we need solutions, and food waste reduction is one of them.
And you and many others talked about donations today. The irony that it's costing organizations money to pick up food and donate it. Well, it should be the opposite. They should be paid to pick up the food. Do you think that could shift now that we have politicians' attention?
Hopefully. I think the Nordics is kind of falling down the trap of the UK and the US a bit and really pushing for food banks, which I'm surprised because social justice has been much more part of the history in this part of the world. But industry, as we've said, is powerful, 3 companies own 90% of the sales in this country of Sweden. So that holds a lot of power. Food banks are going to be here for the short term, especially when so many people are struggling with inflation. But long term, I just don't think it's fair for such powerful companies to offset, ultimately, their dirty work onto unpaid labour. And I think ultimately with so many people being part of unions, for example, in the Nordics, which is unusual in the Anglo-Saxon world, people are going to start putting 2 and 2 together. So medium term, I don't think they'll be able to get away with that.
Great. Thank you so much, Matt Homewood, for joining here from Framtiden.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
And check out the Instagram account, An Urban Harvester. 19,000 followers and lots of dumpster diving there. Fun stuff or terrifying stuff, depending on how you how you view it. My name is Christian von Essen. I'm recording here from Nordic Food Waste Summit 2023 in Stockholm at Garnisonen. Thank you so much for listening.